Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu, izinkan kami dari Bahasa Global untuk membacakan panduan pada webinar pagi hari ini. Good morning ladies and gentlemen, allow us from Bahasa Global to present the user guide for the webinar today. Berikut panduan cara mengaktifkan fitur penerjemahan pada aplikasi Zoom, apabila Bapak Ibu menggunakan laptop atau PC. Pada bagian pojok kanan bawah, akan terdapat lambang bola dunia. Mohon untuk klik Language Interpretation dan memilih bahasa yang Bapak atau Ibu ingin dengarkan. Mohon tidak perlu mute original audio dan tidak perlu pindah channel saat berbicara. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are accessing the Zoom using a laptop or PC, simultaneous interpretation services are available. You can go to the bottom right of your screen. There you will find globe icon or language interpretation button. Click it and select the language that you wish to listen. We recommend you to not mute original audio, and if you would like to speak, you don't have to turn off the interpretation button as well. Bila Bapak atau Ibu mengakses meeting kali ini menggunakan HP atau mobile phone, fitur penerjemahan secara simultan juga tersedia. Bila Bapak atau Ibu ke pojok kanan bawah, akan ada 3 titik. Jika diklik, akan ada language interpretation. Lalu klik, pilih bahasa yang Bapak atau Ibu ingin dengarkan dan tidak perlu mute original audio. Dan terakhir, jangan lupa klik done bila sudah selesai. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are accessing the Zoom using a mobile phone, simultaneous interpretation services are available. You can go to the bottom right of your screen. There you will find 3 dots. Click it and click Language Interpretation, and select the language that you wish to listen. We also recommend you to not mute original audio, and don't forget to click done when you have selected. Bapak dan Ibu, guna memastikan kelancaran pertemuan hari ini, host atau co-host berhak melakukan mute audio atau stop video para peserta yang tidak sedang berbicara, saat mereka tanpa disengaja menyebabkan gangguan terhadap acara. Ini dilakukan untuk menjamin suara pembicara dan juru bahasa tetap jelas. Terima kasih atas kerjasama Bapak dan Ibu sekalian. Selamat beraktivitas. Ladies and gentlemen, please note that to ensure the smooth running of today's meeting, the host or co-host reserve the right to force mute the audio or turn off the videos of participants who are not speaking that may be unintentionally causing disruption to the meeting. This is to ensure that the audio of the speaker and interpreter remains clear at all times. We thank you for your cooperation in this matter. Have a productive webinar. Waktu dan tempat kami persilahkan kepada Ibu Tari sebagai MC untuk memulai webinar pada pagi hari ini. Terima kasih.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Yang terhormat, Direktur Pengembangan Iklim Usaha dan Kerjasama Internasional, Ibu Dwi Wahyuni Kartianingsih. Yang kami hormati, para narasumber dari Asian Development Bank dan pelaku usaha nasional. Yang kami hormati, rekan-rekan dari LKPP, juga kementerian lembaga, serta para peserta dari pelaku usaha Indonesia. Puji dan syukur kita panjatkan kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, kita dapat kembali berjumpa dalam acara Business Opportunity Seminar pada Kamis 28 Juli 2022. Di hari pertama, kita telah menyimak bersama paparan dari para narasumber ADB terkait ADB Business Opportunities dari Transport dan Urban Sector, juga ADB Procurement System, serta sesi sharing pengalaman dari pelaku usaha. Hari ini kita akan melanjutkan dengan beberapa topik lainnya. Dan untuk itu, kegiatan sesi diskusi akan dimoderatori oleh Ibu Widya. Kepada Ibu Widya, kami persilahkan.
Terima kasih Mbak Tari. Mohon izin Ibu Direktur, good morning to all of us. Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Izinkan saya memandu dalam bahasa Inggris untuk seminar hari ini. I am Widya from LKPP will be moderating today's session. Please allow me to explain the brief agenda before we start. In today's session, there will be 3 speakers from the ADB and 1 speaker from Indonesian successful bidder of an ADB project. We will appreciate if the speakers can deliver the presentation within their allocated time. After the presentation, there will be an open forum for discussion. Participants may use raise hand or type the questions in the Q&A box in the Zoom. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, izinkan saya menyampaikan sekali lagi kepada Bapak Ibu bahwa Bapak Ibu dapat memberikan atau mengetikkan pertanyaan dalam Q&A box yang ada dalam Zoom maupun menggunakan fitur raise hand. Mohon jangan ragu untuk bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia karena hari ini kami menyediakan interpreter. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce our first speakers. Our first speaker is Mr. Stephen Peters. Mr. Stephen Peters is Senior Energy Specialist at the ADB. He is responsible for developing the knowledge-based project development and implementation in waste to energy and supporting project across waste, the circular economy, and ocean impacts. He holds a Master of Engineering Science and Bachelor of Engineering from the University of Melbourne. Over to you, Mr. Steve, for delivering the presentation.
Terima kasih, Bu. Bolehkan share?
Yes, Mr. Steve, we will be sharing the presentation.
Okay, terima kasih. I'm just loading up. Selamat pagi, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan. Saya nama Steve dari Singapura. Okay. If you don't mind, I'll speak in English from now on. I'll just share my screen. I work for the Energy Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank, and the energy sector represents a large amount of ADB's lending and is a very active section of the bank. We focus a lot on the activities of climate mitigation and climate adaptation, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. And there are some interesting outcomes in the way we lend and what we lend, which I'll share with you this morning. So unsurprisingly, a large amount of our lending is in electricity transmission and distribution. There is sector development and institutional reform, and then large hydropower. Surprisingly, solar energy doesn't make up a large portion of our current lending. And the reason is because local banks are probably more adept at lending to that market space. So ADB is not needed in that space. Where ADB is needed is in energy efficiency and conservation and renewable energy, other forms of renewable energy. So ADB's portfolio for the last 10 years has been about $36 billion US. About 19 of that was in climate mitigation and about 380 million in adaptation. About 7.4 billion in energy efficiency. So there's a range of activities that we engage in. You can see over each year, there's a big change in exactly what we're doing, and that is in response to the requests from our developing member countries. So about 2/3 of ADB's lending is actually to governments, and so they are our major clients. So when they come to us with a concern or a problem, we will respond by developing a project which suits their needs. We have a new energy policy, and of course this is something of great interest to Indonesia because we are formally closing the door on coal financing. We're leaving the door open for natural gas, subject to it being low carbon. We will still finance hydropower, but on a selective basis. And in my area, we will still finance waste to energy, but again, on a selective basis and within an order which allows for low carbon transition and for more people to get more benefits from that activity. So then, of course, the bottom one, no financing of nuclear energy. That is actually in ADB's charter, that we do not finance nuclear energy because it's large scale and we just don't have the skill set for it. Interestingly, digitization, innovation, technologies are of great interest to us. There's a great Indonesian example of that, which is Octopus, which is an app for waste collection. And you would think, why is the energy guy talking about waste collection? Because when you organize and discover what is going on in the supply chain, you identify opportunities where you can actually intervene. So an example would be a small city with a large amount of waste that goes to landfill, when you know consistently how much that is, you can then build a facility, whether it's recycling, waste to fuels, whatever. So our president has quite clearly stated what we will and will not do. So the energy policy is based on 5 principles, and I won't go into those in detail because we don't have time, but the document's online. One great thing about ADB is everything is online, so you can find out information. Energy transition mechanism, I think many of you might have heard about it. ETM, at this stage, we're formalizing designing the process and working out how it might work. But the focus is to retire assets that are highly polluting early. That will reduce energy costs and, of course, reduce emissions. It will create an opportunity for investment. And then what we hope to do is use this model that will be in 3 selected countries, of which Indonesia is one, to roll out to larger economies, or to other economies, I should say. Indonesia is a very large economy. So one of the things that you commonly hear about within ADB is trust funds. So in the energy sector, we have a number of trust funds that we manage on behalf of, or we manage the money on behalf of the trust funds, the Asian Clean Energy Fund, the Clean Energy Fund, the Climate Change Fund, Clean Energy. And those funds are available for ADB projects. They're not available for external parties, but what I'll explain a little bit further about how you can engage with ADB on a non-procurement basis. So and I'll talk about that in a second. One of the things that's always important to do is to engage, and the best way to have yourself seen and the best way to demonstrate your skill sets is to attend ADB conferences. And every year in June, we have the Asian Clean Energy Forum, which is a very good event for not only presenting, but also for meeting other people. We hope very soon to be able to do this in person. The last few years have been a challenge because of COVID, but one of the things we found is we had a lot more people come, and we found that we got a lot better content. So it's an emerging challenge, and we hope to see you in ASEF at the next event. So the operations types, when I mean operations, is the operations of ADB. So 70% of ADB's lending is sovereign operations. That's lending to governments. Typically, a project will have a 5 to 7 year development cycle. So there might be an inquiry, there'll be some research. Within 2 years or 3 years, there might be a loan, negotiations, and then the loan will be undertaken, and then the project will be developed. And after the project will be assessed. That's the bulk of ADB's work. And the distribution and transmission activities fit very squarely into that. Not sovereign lending, which is the private sector. So we lend to emerging corporates. We lend to companies that have very strong financial credentials and can deliver and achieve outcomes which align with our interests in the energy policy and our wider interests within ADB to reduce poverty, fight climate change, and protect vulnerable people. We have another mechanism which is called financial intermediation, which is where we lend to banks who then on-lend. And not only do we provide a portion of the funding to local banks, but we also bring the knowledge and some of the capability to support them in building a book of investments and loans to achieve an aim. An example might be, for instance, in Indonesia, I'm using this hypothetically, by the way, is to use an example of a loan specifically for rural biogas, which might be through an Indonesian bank, and then ADB would provide some expertise. I know Indonesia is actually quite good at that, so that's a bad example, but that's the type of thing. We have a small venture financing group, and that's not a very large part of our lending. It's only about $80 million. They're actually seeking some additional funds, but they've got some very interesting businesses they're supporting. Where is a little bit more interesting is the blended finance, which is a blending of bonds and blending of sovereign and non-sovereign lending to achieve an activity. This is, you'll see more of ADB's work. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's just to give you an idea that where the types of operations are. ADB doesn't lend for everything. We have specific product types which we provide. And then crowding in the private sector, we want to get private sector involved. And I want to talk about the non-lending engagement, which I think will be very interesting to most of you. You can actually engage with ADB not only in tenders and not only as a consultant, but if you have a technology which has a significant knowledge impact. In other words, for instance, you may have a technology which achieves great outcomes in gender equality and poverty reduction, but also achieves a financial aim, like an app or a social business. We're very interested to hear about it. So the most important thing for you to do before you do any engagement with ADB is to understand what ADB is doing. Everything ADB does is disclosed. We are very, very, very strong on that. So if you wanted to find out more about the activities of ADB, do a search on Google: Asian Development Bank, biogas, Indonesia, poverty, and then you'll see projects come up. You'll see project officers' names identified. Do the research, find out what the projects are. Then approach those project officers and say, we'd like to share knowledge. The division I work for is the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Division. We would be very interested to hear from projects. We get a lot of approaches. We don't always engage with people because some of the technology is not really cutting edge, or there's more, we've already presented on it, but we would love to hear from them. You can provide consulting and contracting services, which are my other colleagues, I think, will talk about in more detail. But if you want to engage with ADB and you're a small firm, always consider teaming up with a larger, more established company. And you can search again online to find out who people are who are doing the work. We do pilot technologies. We do look at technologies which are 6 and 7 on the technology readiness level. And we've piloted a lot of those. And again, the way to engage with ADB is to identify who is researching that by searching adb.org. Just a tip when you engage with project officers, very important to demonstrate that you have domain expertise. So just be calm, present your technology. Just as an example, I had one young chap come in and present to us who gave us 10 minutes about climate change. I think we know a little bit about climate change, so I politely let him talk and said, next time, just go straight to the point. Share a short presentation and always send a thank you note. Remember, we're all trying to achieve the same aim, which is we're all trying to help people, reduce poverty, fix climate change, and make a living. So I wish you luck in your journey with ADB, and very happy to hear from any innovation in Indonesia, specifically on energy and waste or the oceans. So on that note, I'll hand back. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen, for the presentation on ADB's projects on energy sector, which focuses on clean energy. We also talk about the Energy Policy 2021 regarding supporting low carbon transition in Asia and the Pacific, and also the energy events. It's also about the supports given by the ADB in the energy sector, which are lending or financing, as well as non-lending engagement. And I think one important thing to note is we have to know, the business sectors have to know what ADB is doing and start research, because everything is publicly published. Thank you very much. Before we continue to the next presentation, please let me remind all participants to ask questions in the Zoom through the Q&A box. Bapak Ibu sekalian, mohon izin saya ingatkan kembali, Bapak Ibu dapat menuliskan pertanyaan melalui fitur Q&A di Zoom. Nanti juga kami akan berikan kesempatan untuk bertanya langsung melalui raise hand. Now the next presentation will be delivered by Mr. Dawal Jam. Mr. Dawal is Principal Public-Private Partnership Specialist in the ADB. Mr. Dawal is a Principal PPP Specialist in OPPP at the ADB. He has over 15 years of experience in finance and PPPs. Before joining ADB, he worked at IFC in their PPP transaction advisory team, where he advised on over 15 PPP projects across 4 continents. He earned an MBBS from Mumbai University and an MBA from the Indian School of Business with a dual major in finance and operation. Mr. Dawal, the floor is yours.
Terima kasih Ibu, and selamat pagi to everyone. My name is Dawal Jam. I'm from the Office of Public-Private Partnerships at ADB. I'm wondering if the presentation is up. Next slide, please. So we start with the ADB's core sectors or priority focus areas for private sector operations, which includes public-private partnerships as PPPs. So the core and the largest section is infrastructure, and in infrastructure, we talk about power generation, transmission, then transport in terms of airports, airlines, roads, shipping, logistics, rail, all those things, information and communication services, and any other infrastructure which is required by a country. The second priority focus is finance and capital markets, where we try to focus on increasing access to finance or filling market gaps via trade and supply chain financing, insurance or digital finance, anything that we can work in that direction. The third pillar or priority area is agribusiness. And agribusiness, again, in the full range of support that can be provided from private sector, from inputs and farming and processing, distribution, sales, logistics. And the fourth pillar or the fourth priority area is in social sector, which is health and education, where we support suppliers in terms of medical equipment, pharmaceutical services, and then into service delivery for hospitals, clinics, diagnostics, distributors, e-health, telehealth, brick and mortar education in terms of schools, universities, colleges, and online education too. So these four are the core areas of ADB's priority areas for private sector and PPPs. Next slide, please. So in terms of ADB's operational framework for a PPP, the whole range of the whole environment can be spread across four pillars, and we have tried to show it here from pillar 1 to pillar 4. The first one is advocacy and capacity development. Under this, it's all about creating awareness, invoking leadership, trying to help clients or government agencies to identify and select PPPs in a potential sector, develop capacity in terms of what projects or what sectors are amenable to PPPs, and share any external knowledge links, or try to share knowledge in any other international manner. The second pillar is enabling environment, which goes a bit deeper, and in this case, there could be support in terms of enabling policy, enabling environment. Even in some examples, we have helped some DMCs to establish PPP centers and create PPP laws. The third pillar, which is the core business area for OPPP, is actually project development. This is transaction advisory, where projects have been identified and selected for a PPP, and OPPP supports or advises government clients in development of these projects, and to provide full support from conceiving the project till commercial close, or even till financial close in some cases. Commercial close meaning when the PPP contract is signed between a private partner and the government agency, and financial close is when the project finances have been locked in and mobilization has been confirmed. In this case, I need to mention that when ADB is looking at projects, it looks at pathfinder projects, which are new to a sector or new to a country or a region, or have been proven difficult to implement. The last pillar, the fourth one, is project financing, which any PPP project would need. And what we do as ADB is, one, through PSOD, we do provide direct financing to projects, but overall from the PPP perspective, we do work in facilitating raising finance both from public and non-public sources. And so ADB sovereign and non-sovereign operations both come in here to provide finances. And what also is looked at during this period is to secure any guarantees, which is internal or external to ADB for PPP projects. So In summary, what ADB does, what OPPP at ADB does, is to support the full range of activities which are required for environment in a DMC for public-private partnerships. I need to mention, and we can see it in the bottom orange box, about AP3F, which is Asia Pacific Project Preparation Facility. As Steve was mentioning, within ADB, we talk a lot about trust funds, and this is also a fund about which I will, give a bit more details in a couple of slides later. Next slide, please. So now going into the details of transaction advisory services, which, as I said, was the core that we provide. We do support a client in a DMC as an end-to-end solution, right from conceiving the project, even selecting a project, in advising the government of whether it is a good candidate for a PPP project or not, and right till the end, up to financial closure, and sometimes even beyond that. If the client has a requirement, has a need, then we support the client even beyond that, beyond financial closure. We here as ADB, we do support DMC clients and can support private entities also in DMC countries to implement a PPP, because it is, at the end of the day, it is a deal between a government agency and private sector. And here we also, the DMC clients can use AP3F funds to cover initial project support costs and even later for project monitoring. Also, a very critical point out here is that these services are on a fee base, and what OPPP does is to seek cost recovery over the costs which have been spent, or the expenses on the particular project. I would also like to mention that these costs usually are only external consultant costs that that OPPP had to bear during implementation of the project. Now, looking at the whole transaction advisory scope of what we can work on, and the first thing is project definition. And when we say project definition, it is the preliminary studies and pre-feasibility studies to analyze and understand what is the actual scope of the project, to define the scope of the project. And in that, during that work, we look at all the aspects in terms of all the legal frameworks, regulatory aspects, technical aspects, and have a very broad contour of how the project is defined. And then once a project has been defined and the DMC client agrees to it, we go to the more detailed project preparation phase, where a detailed feasibility study is conducted. Full financial, commercial, and structuring aspects are done. Risks are identified and allocated to the right partner. A lot of market sounding happens at this time. A very detailed financial analysis and financial model is conducted. And once this is done, we go on to the next step, which is going to the tender phase, the procurement phase, where all the documents are prepared in terms of inviting tenders and the PPP contract, which has to be signed ultimately between a private partner and the GCA meaning the government contracting agency. So we do support in preparation, through our legal consultants in preparation of all those documents, and that goes to the GCA for approval. After approvals, it is negotiated in the market through a tender, and then it is finalized. Once the final agreement is finalized, bids are invited, and then whatever the bidding framework is, based on that, the private partner is selected and the contract is signed, which in technical terms is commercial closure of a PPP project. So we support our DMC clients through our consultants in all these aspects, including for preparing documents and in the whole tender process. After commercial close, the project would need financial close, and many times DMCs require us to tag along and to stay along with the government to help with negotiations, especially on direct agreements between GCAs and banks, also to review the financing agreements and just overall ensure that the financial closure is happening as per the PPP contract, which was agreed and signed. After that, the project can go into or will go into project implementation or operations phase. There might be a construction phase and then an operations phase, but many times our DMC clients have requested us to stay along even further for initial hand-holding and to sort out any issues which may come up early in the project. And there we, through our consultant support for in terms of monitoring of the project, supervising an EPC contract or supervising a O&M contract, working with disbursement of loan, looking at all those things are in place. And sometimes projects need restructuring. So we, along with our consultants, help our DMC clients to work on restructuring aspects, which may include technical and definitely legal aspects. And during all these sub phases, we continue providing capacity building and enabling environment support to clients. And that can happen during any phase of our transaction advisory services. And out there, again, it is overall knowledge sharing, capacity building, workshops, preparation of standard documents, working on policy frameworks, institutional frameworks, and legal and regulatory aspects. So this is the core of what OPPP does. And during this work, we work with a lot of consultants, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Next slide, please. So as we see in this slide, first talking about Asia Pacific Project Preparation Facility, AP3F. This is a pool of funds, a trust fund, which has been dedicated for PPPs and for private sector participation. And the main donors are Government of Japan, Canada, Australia, and ADB has also put in a contribution. The main activities to be funded by this facility, mostly on a grant basis, is project preparation and structuring, which we just spoke about, capacity development and policy work, and project monitoring. This is the phase after the project has achieved financial closure, commercial closure, and it goes into the next phases. And AP3F fund can support all of these activities. Next slide, please. When we work on a project along with, when we're providing support to a DMC client, we work with a team of consultants, which usually in almost all the projects includes at least a technical consultant, a legal consultant. We also have tax, insurance, financial modeling consultants. Sometimes we need external environmental and social consultants. Sometimes we need communication consultants. It depends upon the need of the project. But we do engage consultants, either firms or as individuals, for providing advice to our DMC clients for PPP projects. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of a few projects which we have worked on so far. As of March, this year, we had worked on 44 projects and 55 transactions across 18 countries, and the expected mobilization from these is about $2.5 billion. As you can see, we are spread across the whole of Asia. Next slide, please. So this is a project in Indonesia currently, which ADB is providing support on. It is a waste to energy project in South Tangerang, and the background is very normal that the requirement is for 1,000 ton per day, but the design capacity is only for about 300 to 400 ton per day. And that's why private sector operators being roped in for this. This is going to be one of the first waste to energy projects in Indonesia. And in terms of the scope of services, it's the full transaction advisory support, right from beginning to the end, as I said, the full services. And the impact coming out of this project is improved efficiency, improved waste management, reduction in carbon emissions, improved environmental and public health, and of course, mobilization of private sector into public infrastructure. Out here also, we are working with a bunch of consultants, which include technical, legal, and environmental consultants. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and just wanted to highlight that potential business opportunities on PPPs include project development, which is advising on a project, or sometimes co-funding for transaction advisory services. There could be investment, in terms of equity as sponsors or lenders, or lending advisory for projects. And of course, there could be contractors in terms of EPC contractors or O&M service providers for particular projects. Thanks. That's the last slide for today.
Thank you, Mr. Dawal, for delivering interesting presentation on PPP. It includes core sectors, focus areas, operational framework from pillar 1 until pillar 4, as well as transaction advisory services. As you also mentioned, that ADB supports client from project definition to commercial close or financial close. ADB can also support private sectors. There are also a AP3F, as you mentioned, that can be utilized. And the last one is about the potential opportunities, which includes the project development, investment, and also contractors. Thank you very much, Mr. Dawal. Moving on to our third speaker, Ms. Galia Ismakova. Ms. Galia has 20 years of work experience, including over 21 years in ADB. She has been involved in promoting e-government procurement agenda, leading various ADB initiatives. She holds master's degree in philosophy from Tashkent State University, PhD in philosophy from Academy of Sciences, and also master in business administration from University of Western Australia. She is an associate member of Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development and a member of Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Ms. Galia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and selamat pagi to the participants who are joining today. I was also delivering a presentation yesterday, and some of my presentation yesterday and today actually overlaps, since some of the participants might be both in terms of consultants and also provision of services as well. So today I was asked to specifically talk about consulting opportunities. Can we please go to the next slide, please? So today I will be briefly talking to you about ADB procurement policy, ADB procurement regulations, guidance notes, and staff instructions. And these are the type of documents that you will need to know before you actually try to access any opportunities funded by the Asian Development Bank. Next slide, please. So ADB procurement framework is a procurement framework that was adopted in 2017, so 5 years ago. And it consists of ADB procurement policy, so-called policy, and as a procurement regulations for ADB borrowers or regulations. We also have associated staff instructions and guidance notes. So for those of you who are actually following ADB operations for quite some time, you know that prior to 2017, ADB had two types of documents that were actually guiding procurement of goods, works, and services, and also consulting services. This was ADB procurement guidelines and ADB guidelines for use of consultants. So since 2017, the two separate types of guidelines have been merged into one procurement policy. So ADB procurement policy was approved by ADB Board of Directors, and it specifies the ADB 6 core procurement principles and other considerations that are relevant to procurement in ADB finance operations. Regulations is a type of documents that is below the line of the policy. The regulations are approved by ADB management, and they provide choices for ADB borrowers or grant recipients to allow them to determine most appropriate procurement arrangements. So staff instructions are instructions that are approved by the Procurement, Portfolio and Financial Management Department. And these instructions define roles and responsibilities of ADB staff in implementing policy and regulations, including oversight over procurement decision made by the borrowers. We also have a set of documents, 26 of them, called guidance notes, and the guidance notes are there to specifically provide guidance on procurement, consulting services, on use of high-level technologies, on electronic procurement, on specific procurement issues such as abnormally low bids, etc. So the guidance notes are there precisely to guide and to give the opinion on what is considered to be the current good practice in procurement. And because these are the documents that are looking at current practices, these are the type of documents that are also more likely to be updated. So the first version of guidance note came in 2017, and as recently as 2021, they were already updated, at least quite a few of them. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I already mentioned that 2017 is a key date for application of ADB procurement policy. However, in general, ADB projects are implemented on average within 7 years. So if you are looking that we are now in 2022, we still have at least another 2 years of tail end of project implementation from previous previous projects. So the previous projects, pre-2017 processing, the policies applicable to recruitment of consultants and service providers are those that were stipulated in the guidelines on use of consultants by ADB and its borrowers in 2013. So the borrowers actually have the opportunity to move from the previous procurement framework with the guidelines on use of consultants and procurement guidelines to the new procurement policy. And these two policies are not contradicting each other. The new procurement policy provides a wider range of options and more flexibility, which I will cover slightly later in this presentation. Next slide, please. So the core procurement principles of ADB procurement policy are economy, efficiency, fairness, transparency, quality, and value for money, where price alone may not sufficiently represent value for money. So as you may have been aware, the ADB consulting guidelines have always stipulated quality as one of its core procurement principles. And when we merge two types of procurement policy documents into one called ADB procurement policy, we decided in consultation with the borrowers that the quality is actually very important procurement principle, and it actually merges in the understanding of value for money as well. So as a result, some of the ideas that previously were only prevalent in the consulting guidelines, for example, use of merit points in evaluation, are now also available in the procurement of goods and services. Next slide, please. So what are the differences between the pre-2017 guidelines and the new procurement policy? First of all, we're looking at faster, better and more efficient ADB and more efficient ADB operations. In faster consultant selection, we first of all acknowledge the efficient use of electronic procurement systems, and with use of electronic procurement system, we're looking at shorter advertising periods. So we shorten the advertising periods for the loan consulting as well, up to 2 weeks when previous guidelines required us to advertise for at least 1 month. So fewer transactions require ADB prior review, as there are fewer submissions to ADB. We increase support to framework agreements, including those set up by the recipient governments. We have also done the, we have put the flexibility in selecting consultants with eligibility and shortlisting requirements being relaxed. So if we compare the pre-2017 guidelines with the new procurement policy, previous guidelines specified that no more than 2 companies from the same country could be shortlisted. And in some countries, it created a huge difficulties, including, for example, in the Pacific. So we realized that the shortlisting actually need to be more specific to market interest to the proposed assignment. We also have relaxed eligibility requirements for the experts that are engaged under firm assignments as well. With more prevalent alternative procurement arrangements, including those with World Bank and other development partners, we also have looked at relaxing eligibility requirements. In terms of supporting quality and value for money and high-level technologies, we moved from the standardized 80-20 ratio for quality cost and cost-based selection to 90-10 ratios of quality cost-based selection, which actually mostly signifies to the markets that our attention to the quality of the proposals and quality of consulting services is paramount. We further provided a stronger support for planning and contract management, including support for consulting transactions from beginning to the end, with more planning upfront, including specific market sounding in strategic procurement planning, which I covered yesterday more specifically in the presentation. We also specified consultant complaint handling procedures, which are more fair and transparent, and we set up ADB procurement complaint handling mechanism as well. Next slide, please. So any arrangements that ADB considers in its projects need to be fit for purpose. And what does it mean? It means that any procurement arrangements need to reflect strategic needs and circumstances of the situation. And the standardized approach cannot be used for a variety of situations. So considering that ADB have 68 member countries and we have at least 35 client countries, that are still having some kind of operations, we need to understand that operations, for example, in Indonesia and operations in Tuvalu or People's Republic of China may be very different. And there might be some capacity constrained environments, and there might be some environments where the capacity is actually prevalent in the local market, and customized approach shall be adopted, which takes this into account. Next slide, please. This slide might be a bit confusing, especially for people who are not reading documents such as guidelines and policies every day. But just to explain to you what it means that specifically for companies and consultants from Indonesia, they are eligible to participate in variety of contracts, not just in Indonesia, but across Asia and Pacific, as long as they are specified as international consulting expertise. You can actually supply this expertise to other member countries. Next slide, please. Considering again the geographic location of Indonesia and that you are next to Pacific, which has 14 developing member countries, Pacific has a substantial number of co-finance operations, especially those that are co-financed with World Bank, European Investment Bank, with Government of Australia, Government of New Zealand. And ADB in these cases may agree to apply the procurement rules or procedures of another multilateral bilateral agency or organization involved in the project, and may agree to such a party taking a leading role in providing implementation support and monitoring project procurement activities. So we have signed a number of alternative procurement arrangements with multilateral development banks, and the list of these alternative procurement arrangements is available on the ADB website. So what does it mean? It means that only one set of procedures is applied for a transaction, and the value, risk, and complexity of the procurement is taken into account. So can we please go to the next slide? So in terms of roles and responsibilities of ADB, when the borrower, for example, the government of Indonesia, borrows for a specific project, the borrower prepares the procurement plan that is agreed by ADB. The borrower is then legally responsible and accountable for procurement. It invites, receives, and evaluates bids and award of the contract. And the contract is between the borrower and the supplier or service provider or contractor, and ADB is not party to this contract. So very often we receive complaints on specific actions of the borrowers. And while we can refer these complaints to the borrower or provide an opinion about validity of the complaint, the responsibility for the procurement and also for complaint handling rests solely with the borrower. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what we do, we review the borrower's procurement procedures, documents, bid evaluation, award recommendations, and contracts under a risk-based approach, which means that not every transaction is being reviewed by ADB. And the approach is actually specified in the procurement plan that is disclosed on ADB website, where we specify whether prior or post-review sampling is applied to a specific transaction. So ADB may, where necessary, provide extended support without diminishing responsibilities of the borrower for the execution of procurement. And what it means is that in some specific situations for consulting services, the recruitment of consultants is delegated to ADB, and such selection is done by ADB, sometimes with participation of the borrower, and the borrower is then taking it ahead with the contract negotiations and the implementation. Can we please go to the next slide? So I was previously describing what does ADB responsible for and what is the government responsible for. And now I'm going to cover what you are responsible for. You as a bidder are responsible for making sure that the process in which you participate is a process in which you engage proactively. And what it means is that you will critically review bidding documents to see if there is any ambiguity, omission, or internal contradiction, or any feature or specifications which may be discriminatory or restrictive. In such cases, you should be seeking clarifications from the borrower in writing within the time period specified in the bidding documents. So sometimes I see that the bidding documents are actually revised in response to such clarifications. Next slide, please. So the specific bidding documents issued by the borrower govern each procurement transaction. If a bidder concludes that any of these provisions are inconsistent with the regulations or the policy, they should be raising the issue with the borrower. So again, you should not be taking a passive approach to the bidding and take the responsibility of examining the documents and raising any issue of ambiguity, contradiction, or omission properly. Next slide, please. Very often I'm being asked, what are your tips for creating a successful bid? And sometimes the tips are actually very simple. Sometimes you may be very well qualified and you may have all the experience in the world, but you might be in a situation when you have lost this opportunity of quality control. So I see, for example, incomplete bids. I see bids where a specific CV is listed, but not attached in the proposal. I see situations when the bids are not signed, when they need to be signed. So you need to see that you are compliant with critical requirements, technical and commercial, which if you are non-compliant will result in the rejection of bid. So first and foremost, I would suggest that you have quality assurance procedures when you actually are preparing your own bids. So once bids are received and publicly opened, you're not able to change the price or substance of the bid. You would not be able to actually put the missing CV or do anything to fix the bid later. Okay, next slide, please. So again, my colleagues today, specifically Mr. Peters, was saying that one thing that you need to take into account is that ADB website is practically a treasury of information that you need to participate in the biddings. So information on bidding opportunities under open competitive bidding may be obtained from ADB procurement plans that are disclosed on ADB website and specific procurement notices. We also publish them on consultant management system. Can we please go to the next slide? So if you are a consultant and if you are not yet on consultant management system, you are missing out. So if there is only one thing that you need to do after you attend the session today, and if you are a consultant, I would suggest you check ADB Consultant Management System by clicking on cms.org. And simplified registration in ADB Consultant Management System only takes up to 15 minutes. So we ask you some information to actually prove that if you are an individual consultant, you physically exist. And if you are a company, that you are properly incorporated or registered. Next slide, please. So what does it allow you to do? ADP Consultant Management System allows you free use for searching of consulting opportunities, viewing information on shortlisted bids, viewing awarded contracts, and participating in ADB biddings for consulting services. Okay, next slide, please. So how do you find about the opportunities that you might have? The best things that you can have is to sign for weekly notifications of consulting opportunities. And you can also check your check the opportunities daily, because normally the opportunities are published after midnight Manila time every day. So you can slice and dice opportunities for firms, for individuals, for a specific expertise, for a type of budget, and for a type of funding available as well. Next slide, please. We also have created some filters that will allow you to see the COVID-19 responses and consulting opportunities that are associated with this response. Next slide, please. So, excuse me, can we go to the next slide? So in consulting services recruitment notice, we have information that will allow you to make an informed decision. And this informed decision comes to a profile of opportunities where we actually stipulate the budget, the duration of the assignment, the type of assignment. We also specify if it is potentially possible to extend this assignment. And sometimes you might be looking at a small contract, which may, if you perform well, become your stepping stone to bigger contracts. So all of this information is listed in the profile. We also have information about terms of reference. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here we have the information on the terms of reference. And can we go to the next slide, please? And we also disclose the budget. The budget here includes competitive components such as remuneration and out-of-pocket expenses, and also provisional sums that are completely that are practically a pass-through budget items in the budget for the consulting services. We also ask you to, if you decide to express interest, there are a couple of questions where we're asking you if the terms of reference and the budget are adequate. And this is how we conduct the market sounding, where we take into account what consultants are actually telling us about the quality of our preliminary work in seeking expression of interest. Next slide, please. So in terms of shortlisted firms, you might think, why do I need to know who are shortlisted? When you only just start taking a view and deciding whether you want to be an ADP consultant, a list of shortlisted firms is a great place to start, because you will know who is likely to be considered for the assignments, and if there are any opportunities for smaller firms to join as a partner to a larger firm, or, for example, an individual expert to join the team of experts under particular firm assignments. Next slide, please. we give this information in historic form as well, so you can actually see which firms have been successful in getting shortlisted. Next slide, please. The next slide is practically okay. If you imagine the funnel and you look at all the companies that express interest, and then you get all those that get shortlisted, and then you get to the point of contracts that are awarded. So here you're actually fundamentally looking at companies which has the best competitive advantage, and you perhaps can learn from them, or perhaps you can join them in the next rounds of participating for ADP projects. Next slide, please. So considering that, considering the use of electronic procurement, such as consultant management system in recruitment of consultants for ADB, ADB technical assistance and staff consultancies in particular, and also advertisement for loan consultancies, you may need to know how to operate the system and how to navigate it. And sometimes having quick reference guides or learning videos is the fastest way to get yourself acquainted. For this, I would recommend using consultant tutor. Next slide, please. So we have here some web links to the quick reference guides for individuals and the firms that are using consultant management system. Okay, the next thing that you need to know is what kind of documents there, what are the bidding documents, and what are do's and don'ts of the bidding documents. And for this, you need to examine standard request for proposal or RFP for consulting services. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here we have the information on how you can find the user guide on selection of consulting services for the borrowers. And it includes some tips for the borrowers how to create a standard request for proposal. And it is very transparent. And you can actually have a look at the documents. The documents called standard because they are exactly this. They only couple of sections of the standard request for proposal, for example, the bid data sheet in terms of reference and evaluation criteria, can be changed as together with special conditions of contracts. But other, it is a very predictable type of documentation. Next slide, please. So here we provide you the standard documents for selection of consultants, including the templates for expression of interests. And again, while we provide you with these documents, we specify that use of information technology is tantamount to the participation for consulting firms and individual consultants. So if there is a time to brush up your IT skills, the time is now. Next slide, please. I have actually given you quite a lot of information, and perhaps it was a bit too fast. However, I am giving you the links to where you can refresh your knowledge and perhaps rewatch it at your leisure. I would also recommend that you check ADB on LinkedIn. Can we please go to the next slide, please? So ADB has several LinkedIn pages, including the LinkedIn page for ADB, LinkedIn pages for specific country operations. And we also have 2 LinkedIn groups. One of them is for ADB consultants, and another is for ADB suppliers. ADB Consultants Group have over 8,000 members, close to 9,000 members already. And the main purpose of this group is to facilitate networking between consultants who want to forge partnerships. From time to time, there are opportunities that are published there by the consultants that are not funded by ADB. And we have no problem with this as long as the experience and qualifications of the borrowers, of the consultants are actually getting developed for the purpose of better serving our clients. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Galia, for your comprehensive explanation on ADB procurement framework, the procurement policy, procurement regulations, the guided notes, as you mentioned, and also about the new approach to consulting services. I think that's very important, the faster selection, flexibility, the value for money, strong support from beginning to end. And also you mentioned about the roles and responsibility of the government and the ADB and the bidder. And I think it is worth noting that the bidder should critically review the bid document, including the methodology and the criteria prior submission of bids. And also, I think this is very important that you mentioned the cms.adb.org, and the businesses should check this website, and I quote from your statement that otherwise will be missing out. I think, thank you so much, Ms. Galia. Now we are moving on to our last speaker for today, Bapak Peter Franz, President Director of PT Tirya Jasa Engineering Consultant. Bapak Peter has experience working as a consultant with the ADB, the World Bank, the JICA, ISDB, and IFA in various projects for more than 10 years. His expertise are in the areas of drinking water and sanitation, water resources, mining and energy, spatial planning and settlements, urban infrastructure and buildings, roads and bridges, community empowerment, as well as education and training. Pak Peter, waktu dan tempat disilakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Makasih Mbak Dia. Saya akan membawakan bagaimana memenangkan proyek-proyek di ADB berdasarkan best practice yang telah saya lakukan selama ini. Mungkin bisa membantu teman-teman untuk memenangkan tender-tender di ADB. Next, bagaimana strategi memenangkan tender di ADB? Tentunya tergantung dari budaya masing-masing konsultan. Karena setiap konsultan tentunya mempunyai budaya di perusahaannya yang menimbulkan habit daripada konsultan tersebut. Tetapi secara umum, next, memenangkan proyek ADB saya membagi menjadi 9 kesiapan. Pertama, kita harus menyiapkan kelengkapan dari perusahaan, terutama masalah administrasi, sehingga kita ready untuk mengikuti lelang-lelang ADB. Yang kedua, tentunya kita harus mencari tahu sebanyak mungkin informasi lelang di ADB. Tadi sudah dijelaskan bagaimana kita masuk ke ADB lewat CMS dan link-link yang ada. Tentunya Bapak-Bapak semua sudah paham dengan hal tersebut. Yang ketiga, tentunya kita harus membaca dengan sesama dan memeriksa semua pengumuman yang sesuai dengan yang kita mau. Dan keempat, melengkapi persyaratan lelang dan dengan biasanya kalau di perusahaan kami dengan membuat checklist sehingga tidak ada yang tertinggal. Terus yang berikutnya tentunya kita memperhitungkan besaran dari proyek tersebut apakah sesuai dengan yang kita mau, karena ADB kadang-kadang banyak proyeknya yang kecil, besar, menengah, tentunya sesuai dengan size daripada company kita. Yang berikutnya yang nomor 6 yang perlu kita ikuti adalah mengikuti jadwal tender seperti biasa. Tentunya mengikuti jadwal tender ini perlu kita cermati kadang-kadang karena dengan adanya e-lelang ADB sekarang agak pendek waktu pelelangannya. Tentunya yang 7 adalah menghindari perbuatan-perbuatan yang melanggar hukum karena ADB sangat strike terhadap masalah-masalah hukum ini. Sehingga teman-teman dari konsultan, terutama teman-teman dari konsultan Indonesia harus mematuhi hal ini. Yang ke-8 tentunya kita sebagai bidder ingin memenangkan, tentunya harus melangsungkan penawaran yang dengan harga yang wajar. Dan terakhir adalah tentunya kalau kita menang menjaga hubungan baik dengan klien. Next. Kalau kita mengikuti jadwal tender, tentunya kita harus mengikuti, next slide please. Pertama tentunya kita lihat pengumumannya. Dari pengumuman tersebut kita perlu go or not go terhadap pekerjaan tersebut. Kita evaluasi secara internal, apakah kalau kita go, tentunya kita melihat expression of interest-nya. Dari expression of interest tersebut kita evaluasi. Kita evaluasi apakah perusahaan kita mampu untuk mengikutinya. Kalau kita mampu tentunya kita akan sebagai shortlisted, dan kalau tidak mampu kita tentunya mengevaluasi kenapa kita tidak mampu. Ini perlu untuk pembelajaran kita untuk tender berikutnya. Next. Di proposal state tentunya sesudah kita shortlist, tentunya kita akan mendownload RFP-nya, terus kita biasanya memasukkan surat minat atau confirmation letter untuk kita go atau non go. Terus tentunya kalau kita go, kita mengikuti unwishing atau pre-proposal conference-nya, dan tentunya habis itu kita mempersiapkan proposal preparation-nya, kita mengevaluasi, sehingga kita bisa menjadi pemenang. Kalau kita lost, tentunya kita adakan evaluasi kenapa kita kalah, sehingga kita bisa menjadi pemenang. Next. Next, please. Nah, untuk preparation expression of interest, ada beberapa hal yang perlu dipertimbangkan setelah kita mencari informasi lelang melalui laman IDB, atau kalau di yang lain juga bisa. Tentunya kita mengikuti guidelines yang ada di ADB 2017. Kita pertama harus melihat jenis pelelangannya, apakah ini KCBS atau KBS atau KCS atau FBS atau list cost. Nah, ini tentunya kita harus pertimbangkan masa-masa kita yang ikut di mana, dan kita harus juga mempertimbangkan pengalaman pekerjaan sejenis kita, dan juga mempertimbangkan kemampuan manajerial dan teknikal dan finansial yang kita punyai, sumber daya, apakah kita harus berlaksakan sendiri, ataukah kita berpartner, berkonsorsium dengan konsultan lokal atau asing. Nah, setelah ini kita evaluasi, kita persiapkan, kalau kita kuat, kita akan go, kalau kita tidak kuat, ya kita akan tidak ikut dalam lelang tersebut. Next. Dalam preparation expression of interest, tentunya beberapa hal yang harus biasa yang kami lakukan di Ciria Jasa adalah tentunya pertama data administrasi perusahaan, tentunya aspek legal perusahaan, susunan kepemilikan, kepengurusan, kemampuan keuangan, dan juga masalah kemampuan teknik. Dan dalam menyampaikannya tentunya LOI ini penting sekali karena kita harus menunjukkan kemampuan kita dalam melaksanakan dan memenuhi tugas yang diminta. Seringkali teman-teman lupa bahwa apa yang diminta di LOI tidak dilaksanakan. Yang kedua, kita menginformasikan bahwa kita sudah kita mendukung dan dengan pengalaman-pengalaman yang sejenis yang pernah kita lakukan. Yang ketiga, tentunya kita sudah familiar dengan lokasi pekerjaan dan jenis pekerjaan tersebut. Dan keempat, tentunya kita sajikan prosedur penanganannya, bagaimana interaksi antara penyedia jasa, tenaga ahli, dan klien. Kadang-kadang kita lupa hal-hal tersebut. Terus yang berikutnya tentunya kita menjelaskan bagaimana respon penyedia jasa dalam menangani komplain resolution-nya. Kita tentunya masukkan juga, ini merupakan kadang-kadang key point dalam LOI kita. Terus yang keenam, juga bagaimana perusahaan menjaga kinerja tim selama proyek sehingga menjadi tim yang solid. Karena pengalaman kami di Indonesia itu tenaga tetap itu sangat sedikit, sehingga kita perlu membina tim agar dalam pekerjaan di ADB ini dari pengumuman sampai pemenang ini cukup panjang, sehingga kita harus bisa menangani tenaga ahli kita yang kita propose sehingga tidak terjadi bongkar pasang atau ganti personil dalam perjalanan. Yang berikutnya tentunya kita memberikan jaminan sosial bagi staf yang terlibat dalam proyek. Ini untuk meyakinkan bahwa perusahaan kita cukup bonafit untuk mengikuti pekerjaan IMO, sehingga pekerjaan-pekerjaan itu tenaga-tenaga ahli merasa nyaman dengan adanya jaminan sosial yang kita berikan. Yang berikutnya yang Ciri Jasa sering lakukan adalah menyampaikan tanggapan ringkas terhadap TOR-nya, sehingga kita perusahaan ini dianggap menguasai tentang apa lingkup pekerjaannya, sehingga kita dapat lulus dalam shortlist tersebut. Yang kesembilan tentunya kita sajikan dengan ringkas pendekatan dan metodologi pekerjaan untuk awal. Kita buat brief. Memang kesulitan dalam konsultan Indonesia adalah proposal writer, dan ini dialami oleh semua perusahaan Indonesia, sehingga sedikit sekali proposal writer yang menguasai di Indonesia ini. Nah, ini tantangan bagi kita untuk ikut dalam hal tersebut. Terus yang berikutnya tentunya kita harus menanggapi terhadap biaya yang ada, biaya yang disediakan, apakah cukup atau tidak. Kita menanggapi secara umum dan memberikan solusi-solusi. Dan C tentunya kita menandatangani fakta integritas dan menyatakan kebenaran dokumen yang disampaikan. Dan terakhir adalah ketersediaan SDM yang dibutuhkan. Kalau sudah ini lengkap, kita periksa satu-satu dan kita submit LOI kita melalui laman CMS yang ada, atau kalau ke pemerintah ke LPC atau website yang ada. Tentunya setelah evaluasi, kalau kita masuk shortlist ya tentunya kita akan terus. Kalau kita tidak masuk, nah ini perlu dievaluasi ulang. Kadang-kadang kita malas mengevaluasi apa yang kita submit, kenapa kita gagal, sehingga kadang-kadang teman-teman banyak gagal di hal ini. Next. Dalam menyiapkan proposal, sudah kita shortlist, tentunya kita mendownload RFP kita mempelajari Section 1, biasanya itu ini standar dari ADB, satu tentang letter of invitation, yang kedua Section 2, instruction to consultant dan datasheet. Ini penting karena di situ banyak hal-hal yang perlu kita pahami, kapan waktu lelangnya, kapan unwinding-nya, kapan pemasukan proposalnya, dan hal-hal lain. Tentunya Section 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 adalah hal yang penting juga. Section 7 dan 8 tentunya kita harus baca sampai semua. Kadang-kadang teman-teman malas membaca, yang dibaca hanya yang TOR dan datasheet-nya, sedangkan kondisi kontrak dan lain-lain perlu juga dibaca. Setelah kita setuju dengan semua, tentunya kita mengirim confirmation letter untuk go atau not go. Kalau kita not go ya sudah selesai. Kalau kita go, tentunya kita harus mempersiapkan 3 hal, yaitu administrasi, technical proposal, dan financial proposal. Nah, kadang-kadang sebelum di Ciri Jasa, sebelum kita masukkan, kita ada quality control untuk mengecek daripada ketiga aspek ini, karena ketiga aspek ini yang akan menentukan sebelum kita mensubmit kepada proposalnya. Memang seperti tadi saya bilang, di Indonesia proposal writer untuk ADB yang bisa berbahasa Inggris sangat sedikit, terutama untuk aspek-aspek konsultan nasional. Tentunya ini tantangan bagi teman-teman, karena proposal writer di Indonesia yang kurang ini, tentunya pemahaman ini perlu kita sampaikan kepada teman-teman yang lain. Tentunya setelah itu, setelah kita masukkan proposal, tentunya di ADB diadakan evaluasi. Insya Allah kalau kita menang, saya pikir ini adalah yang terbaik. Jadi pengalaman kami dengan bekerja dengan ADB cukup fair, cukup bagus dalam mengevaluasi proposal, sehingga selalu Ciri Jasa berusaha memberikan yang terbaik sesuai dengan apa yang diminta di teks daripada TOR. Kadang-kadang teman-teman tidak memahami yang diminta apa, yang ditulis apa. Padahal di ADB sudah jelas teks nomor 1 ini, bagaimana kita mengerjakannya, apa deliverable-nya, kapan waktunya, dan bagaimana output dan outcome-nya. Nah, itu kadang-kadang yang tidak dibuat dengan rapi di proposal, sehingga kadang-kadang teman-teman tidak memahami apa maksud daripada pekerjaan ini, sehingga banyak copy-paste daripada cara-cara mengerjakannya. Kalau Ciri Jasa selalu mengikuti bagaimana yang ada di teksnya, apa tugasnya, bagaimana kita melaksanakannya, dari melaksanakan apa yang kita deliverable, dan kapan itu, dan bagaimana output yang kita lakukan, bagaimana tenaga ahli yang akan menangani, itu kita buat dalam matrik-matrik yang memudahkan daripada evaluator untuk memeriksa, sehingga apa-apa yang kita mau sampaikan dapat tercapai dengan baik, sesuai dengan yang diminta. Nah, pengalaman kami dalam proyek-proyek ADB ini, tentunya ini adalah merupakan kerja tim, karena menurut saya kerja tim ini penting untuk budaya daripada perusahaan. Tidak mungkin seorang bisa sempurna, nobody perfect, but team can be. Itu selalu saya tekankan, dan saya di perusahaan selalu membuat yang terbaik setiap proposal tanpa melihat daripada semuanya. Selalu ciri biasa membuat optimal dari proposalnya, sehingga beberapa proyek dari ADB sudah kami menangkan. Dan dalam sesudah itu tentunya kalau pelaksanaan di Ciri Jasa next itu kami membuat seorang project management support yang akan mensupport proyek ini, yang merupakan perpanjangan tangan dari direksi untuk mengontrol proyek-proyek yang ada kami sudah menangkan sebelum kontrak, sehingga proyek itu dalam pelaksanaannya sampai selesai bisa tercapai dengan bagus. Sehingga dalam setiap proyek Ciria selalu ada PMS yang terjun langsung dalam proyek tersebut, yang mewakili direksi, sehingga bisa day to day untuk melaksanakan proyek yang dimenangkan oleh Ciria dengan ADB atau proyek-proyek lain. Saya kira cukup sekian presentasi singkat saya bagaimana memenangkan proyek-proyek di ADB. Saya pikir hal yang ini perlu kita sama-sama lakukan. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak Pak Peter atas sharingnya mengenai strategi dari PT Ciria Jasa Engineering Consultant untuk memenangkan proyek-proyek tender yang didanai oleh ADB secara komprehensif ya Pak. Saya yakin ini sangat berguna untuk para partisipan pelaku usaha kita yang hadir pada seminar hari ini. Ada beberapa poin tadi yang saya kira penting begitu Pak. Terutama tadi ya saat menyiapkan proposal tadi Pak Peter menyampaikan bahwa harus membaca dengan teliti gitu Pak ya. Jadi requirement yang diminta dalam proyek juga dapat dipenuhi oleh para konsultan. Kemudian yang kedua adalah project management support, di mana memang diterjunkan tim khusus untuk mempersiapkan proyek yang akan diikuti gitu. Terima kasih banyak Pak Peter sekali lagi. Thank you for all the speakers for your information, knowledge, and experience given to us today are really valuable. Now we will begin our Q&A session. We have collected questions from participants. I will kindly ask assistance from the committee to flash the questions on the screen. I think there are some questions that has been answered by the speaker, but if you don't mind, our speaker, Mr. Dawal, Mr. Steve Peters, Ms. Galia, and Pak Peter, if you can share live the answers for the questions. The first question is for Mr. Steve Peters. Could you please share with us regarding upcoming ADB's energy projects, specifically in Indonesia? And the second one, could you elaborate how ADB support private sectors in terms of energy policy? For example, the crowding and non-sovereign lending. And how can we as business actors access this support? Please, Mr. Steve Peters.
Terima kasih, Bu. So I've actually answered this question in the chat, but the important thing to understand is that ADB really wants your help. So you need to spend some time looking at what we're doing and understanding what we're doing. So the best way to do that is Google search and look up ADB Indonesia projects energy. And you'll have 4 or 5 pages of documents of links. Just go through those with a pen, identify who the project officer is. A really simple trick is to actually take their name down and then try and find them on LinkedIn, follow what they're doing in LinkedIn, and then engage with them on LinkedIn. Quite commonly, people do that with me. It's a very useful trick to market yourself to get access to people who are acting on projects. When it comes to procurement, the procurement side of ADB versus the project development side are very separate. So understanding what the project development officer wants is important, but on the procurement side, it's a very, very different animal, and you have to go through the hoops, which my colleagues have explained. But it's very important to demonstrate domain expertise, because when a project officer is confronted with a list of tender submissions to say, who do we, to look at shortlisting, if they know you and they know your capability, you're more likely to get shortlisted than somebody who they don't know. And again, it's not a matter of I want to be very direct on this. It's not a matter of I have a friend at ADB who can get me work. Wrong. It is I have demonstrated my expertise and I've demonstrated my capability or my company's capability so that I can be that I can get a fair chance in procurement, in the choosing in procurement. That's the way to look at it. So I want to be direct on that. In terms of crowding in private sector, one of the ways we try to do that is to identify projects which have both a sovereign and a government and private sector engagement. I'll give you a great example. Say, for instance, there is a waste to energy project, not using Tangerang as an example, using another one perhaps, where there may be, say, 600 tonnes of waste a day. So it's not big enough for a waste to energy plant, but there is an opportunity to fund some recycling activities and maybe some small scale, biogas. So then it's possible under a sovereign loan to provide support to government to develop an area for those activities and increase the capacity of government to manage that, and then to let those spaces out or that land out for those activities to be undertaken. This is a de-risking model. So what happens is, instead of trying to develop the project yourself, ADB will come and help government, and then government will basically build, if you want to use the example like a shopping centre, instead of developing a shopping centre, ADB will help the government develop that space and then lease out or let out small areas of land on that. That allows small to medium enterprises to come in, but it also presents an opportunity for local banks to fund this activity. So that's the sort of activities we have in crowding out. The important thing is to reduce risk on projects. And when I mean that, I mean whoever is best at handling the risk should be the person who handles it. So when you have on this, using this example, one of the big worries is private sector might think, what if I don't get the waste? But if the government says you have the land and the waste is there and that's the firm agreement, then that's a lot easier to operate. Now, when we talk on larger scales, obviously it moves into the PPP space, but it's context driven, but that's an example. So I hope that gives a good enough explanation to the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steve Peter. I think you have explained very comprehensively and crystal clear that how is the best way, actually the more effective way regarding to obtain or to get the support in terms of ADB projects in energy sector. I think that clarifies. We're moving on to the next question, please. To Mr. Dawal, I think also Mr. Dawal has answered, has typed the answers in the chat box, but I think if you may elaborate to answer this question. The first question is, as you mentioned on one of your slides, that OP3CAS, Transaction Advisory Services, assist public and private sector clients in structuring and preparing viable projects from project definition to commercial close or financial close. Would you please explain how private sector clients obtain such assistance, including the funding? The second one is, based on your experience, I would like to understand what makes a PPP project successful from start to finish. PPP project often take a long time just to prepare the project. Mr. Dawal, the floor is yours.
Sure. Terima kasih. So I actually answered this in the chat already, as you mentioned, but private sector clients can also obtain this assistance by reaching out, as Steve has already elaborated enough on how to reach out to ADB and research on adb.org. And depending on whether transaction advisory services or funding is needed, the appropriate department can take discussions ahead, on how detailed and in what capacity the engagement can be possible. In terms of the second question, it's a very long discussion in terms of what makes a PPP project successful. That is discussions for full seminars, actually. But I tried to address the question on the long time taken. And of course, PPP projects do take slightly longer than other projects in the preparation phase. but then a significant amount of time is cut down or cut short during the implementation phase. So in the long run, it has been seen that a well-prepared project always saves time in future. So that way is a PPP project, a well-prepared PPP project, is time well spent on preparation to save more time in future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raul, for your answers. I think we will move on to the next question. Oh, this one is for Ms. Galia. The first question is there any possibility from the ADB to conduct training in order to improve the competence of the consultants? Consequently, local consultants can participate in ADB's finance projects both in Indonesia and abroad. Second question, based on your experience, what are common mistakes done by bidders when preparing proposals in consulting services projects? What are critical elements that we as consultants need to pay attention, especially for those with no experience participating in ADB's project? Your explanation will be very helpful. Thank you, Ms. Dalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I also did respond to this question in the chat. So first of all, today is one of these trainings. So we have the business opportunity seminars where we conduct some kind of training to improve competence of the consultants. We also have pre-COVID, we had face-to-face events called Business Opportunity Fair. And this was a 2-day event in ADB where we have presented actually the pipeline of opportunities, and we also conducted so-called consultants clinic. So the consultants clinic was specifically looking at mistakes and how to read instructions and how to navigate systems and how to deal with different situations. Luckily for you, this type of seminars have been recorded, and they are available on ADB or on ADB managed websites that is called Development Asia. So if you are Googling, try to Google Development Asia, ADB, Business Opportunity Fair, and then you will see this type of seminar. Based on my experience, obviously there are different types of mistakes that are done by the bidders, but the most idiotic ones is missing parts of the proposal. Like, for example, when you receive the evaluation criteria, and when there are 1,000 points, and you do not include CV of an expert, which can potentially gain you up to 100 points, you are a loser. I have seen situations when otherwise very well qualified firms lack this quality control procedures and just do not put the forms. So that would be my suggestion. Please read the criteria properly, and please check that everything that needs to be there is there. Also, possibly as a way of another quality control, ask someone else to read the proposal, not the person who have put it together, but another person, and see if it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dalia, for your explanation and your tips before submitting the proposal, that it is also important to have someone else to read our proposal. Thank you so much. Are there any questions left? The committee, please. Okay, this one is for Pak Peter Franz. Mohon informasi pengalaman Bapak untuk mencari partner konsultan lokal dan konsultan asing, baik di Indonesia maupun di negara lain. Yang kedua, bagaimana cara meningkatkan kompetensi konsultan lokal agar bisa memenuhi requirements proyek-proyek yang didanai ADB atau organisasi internasional lainnya. Mungkin Pak Peter bisa share kepada kami semua, Pak, bagaimana cara mendapatkan partner begitu ya. Tadi sempat Pak Peter menyampaikan bahwa ada beberapa kesulitan begitu ya dalam mencari terutama tenaga tetap begitu. Mungkin ada 2 pertanyaan ini boleh di-share ke kami Pak jawabannya. Terima kasih Pak Peter.
Memang untuk partner lokal, untuk pemain-pemain loan, proyek loan sangat terbatas di Indonesia. BUMN kita pun juga sangat terbatas untuk mengikuti proyek-proyek yang ada di ADB. Sehingga memang ini masalah experience, long experience, diperlukan experience yang panjang untuk bergaul, untuk bekerja sama dengan konsultan-konsultan yang ada di Indonesia. Sedangkan konsultan-konsultan biasanya kalau saya itu tentunya melihat dari list pemenang yang ada di ADB. Nah, dari situ kita kontak, apakah itu konsulan asing maupun konsulan lokal, nah, sehingga kita layangkan surat untuk bekerja sama, untuk melakukan konsorsium. Itu yang biasa kita lakukan pertama-tama untuk mencari partner lokal maupun partner asing. Sedangkan untuk meningkatkan kompetensi konsultan lokal, ini ada beberapa yang biasa kami lakukan untuk memenuhi proyek ADB. Satulah peningkatan pencarian tenaga untuk yang mau bekerja dalam proyek-proyek ADB, karena proyek-proyek ADB ini dari pengumuman sampai pemenang itu cukup lama, ada yang sampai 2 tahun baru bisa diumumkan, sehingga ini menyebabkan banyaknya terjadinya replacement daripada personel yang ada yang sudah kita pasang. Nah, untuk itu biasanya kami dari Ceria Jasa sudah mempunyai jaringan dengan teman-teman lokal yang kami mempunyai database yang cukup kuat untuk memenuhi tenaga yang dibutuhkan. Sedangkan untuk penulis proposal, kadang-kadang ini seperti saya bilang, proposal writer di Indonesia itu yang bisa berbahasa Inggris dan memahami konten daripada ADB itu sangat terbatas dan sedikit. Ini memang kesulitan ini akan terjadi bagi pemain-pemain baru. Tetapi saya selalu optimis, bagaimanapun juga di Indonesia ini sekarang ini ada sekitar 4.000 konsultan nasional dan ada yang sudah masuk di Inkindo sekitar 130-an konsultan asing. Kalau list konsultan asing bisa dilihat dimintain di Inkindo, sedangkan list konsultan nasional juga ada di Inkindo beserta dengan pengalamannya sehingga bapak-bapak dapat bisa mencari konsultan lokal. Dan untuk meningkatkan kompetensi daripada konsultan lokal, ya tentunya pelatihan, bagaimana menulis proposal, bagaimana memahami TOR, bagaimana untuk mengisi peluang-peluang, dan tentunya database daripada database daripada personil yang ada di Indonesia ini perlu ditingkatkan, karena pengalaman saya bekerja sama dengan asing, mereka sangat lengkap database personilnya, sedangkan kalau kita di Indonesia ini untuk database personil sangat terbatas, sehingga kesulitan kita untuk mengisi hal-hal tersebut. Terima kasih, Bu.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Peter atas jawabannya. Saya pikir cukup memberikan insight ya Pak bagi pelaku usaha nasional kita ketika ingin mengikuti proyek-proyek yang didanai oleh ADB maupun oleh organisasi internasional. Are there any questions? Okay, this is to Ms. Galia Ismakova. Is there any application in place that can be downloaded in Play Store or App Store from the ADB to give mobile notification for the new tender and projects? Please, Ms. Galia.
Thank you very much for the question. I suggested to use weekly notifications. Also, weekly notifications actually specify all tenders and projects for all countries. However, if you just go to CMS, you can choose Indonesia only, and it will come up with opportunities for Indonesia only. Through the filtering filtering application. I also have suggested that there are push notifications and alerts that you can sign on ADB website, and I have provided web links in the Q&A for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galia. Maybe I think one more question.
Yes, the question on drawing specifications and other, whether they are paid on ADB website or are you required to work with consultants who work with ADB. So drawing specifications and are normally forming the part of section 6 of bid documents, employees requirements. They are part of the bid documents, and the bid documents, majority of the employers would actually sell them for a fee. The normal fee is between $100 and $200 for purchasing bid documents. Some of the borrowers will distribute bid documents for free, but not all. And you're not required to work with consultants who work with ADB to get hold of specifications. We provide a link to where the documents can be downloaded if the documents are distributed electronically, or the address and contact information of the employers who would be in a position to sell you the documents for a fee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the explanation, Ms. Galia. Or maybe we still have more time. Are there any questions? Okay.
How can we submit a project ID innovation proposal to ADB so that it can be implemented as a project which will be tendered and implemented by ADB? For example, suspension bridge spans 500 meters for 8 to 10 locations in eastern Indonesia. We only have designs that have been approved by the Ministry of Public Works and Housing. So this is actually a very tricky question, because if you submit the idea that becomes a project specifications, and if you are the only companies that can actually meet these specification requirements, you created a conflict of interest for yourself. However, if you are actually promoting your idea or innovation proposal as a generic proposal that is not connected to a specific project, you can do it through number of opportunities, including, for example, for suspension bridge, I would think that this would be a transport week. Or something called brown bag seminars. So in this kind of a situation, I would suggest that you reach out first to the specialists who are developing pipeline and that can consider your innovations. Another thing is that ADB has specific procedures for innovation grants. However, these innovation grants are very specific, for example, on energy, etc. And those innovation grants are designed in a way to remove conflict of interest conundrum from the equation. For this, I would suggest that, again, you follow adb.org and specifically sustainable and climate change department. So hopefully the response wasn't too complicated.
Thank you, Ms. Galia. Maybe I will give like clarification as well to the one who asked this question. Maybe if you may, I will explain in bahasa. Bapak Ibu yang bertanya terkait pertanyaan ini, pada dasarnya proyek-proyek yang didanai oleh mitra pembangunan itu tentu ada cycle-nya begitu Bapak Ibu. Jadi mulai dari pertama itu diusulkan, suatu proyek itu diusulkan dulu melalui Kementerian Bappenas, kemudian nanti ada readiness kriteria, kemudian nanti baru dinegosiasikan dengan pemberi pinjaman atau dengan mitra pembangunan. Jadi proyeknya itu memang merupakan usulan dari KL Bapak Ibu. Itu memang kalau di Indonesia sudah ada pengaturannya. Jadi tidak mengajukan langsung begitu ke ADB, tapi proyeknya itu termasuk dengan priority projects itu diajukan oleh kementerian tertentu gitu ya, oleh KL kepada Bappenas terlebih dahulu, kemudian ada tindak lanjutnya, ada beberapa tahapan yang harus dilewati hingga nanti dilakukan negosiasi dengan donor. Tentunya proses ini juga akan mengikuti akan beriringan begitu dengan project cycle dari pemberi pinjaman. Seperti yang sudah Galia sampaikan di hari kemarin begitu, ada project cycle dari ADB yang itu juga tentu nanti akan beriringan dengan proses atau tata cara pinjaman dan hibah luar negeri yang telah ditentukan oleh pemerintah Indonesia. Thank you Galia for your explanation. I think one of our speaker, Mr. Steve Peters, has raised hand. Anything you want to add or?
Yes, I just wanted to say Galia has made a very clear point about projects, but I wanted to just raise the point that there is a difference between a project and an innovation. And when something is a new technology or a new idea, not necessarily with a specific place, with a specific idea, then that goes into the domain of knowledge as opposed to project. I know it's sometimes hard to understand the difference. So the difference might be, I have a mobile phone, I have an idea for a mobile phone, or I want to sell mobile phones in Indonesia. I want to sell mobile phones in Indonesia is not knowledge, but I have an idea for a phone is knowledge. So if there is a useful idea, we'd be very interested to hear about it in the Sustainable and Development and Climate Change Department, but it would not be something that you would approach ADB to tender on, as Ms. Galia has clearly pointed out. So that's just the slight difference. I hope that is clear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steve Peters, to clarify that the difference between the project and the innovation. I think this is our last question. We indeed have fruitful and valuable discussion today. Before ending this session, I would like to give highest gratitude for our speakers, Mr. Stephen Peters, Mr. Dawal Jam, Ms. Galia Ismakova, and Bapak Peter Franz for delivering the presentations and answers. I will also would like to thank all participants for your active participation and attention. I am now giving back the floor to Mbak Tari. Thank you.
Terima kasih Ibu Widya yang telah memandu berjalannya seminar kita pada hari ini. Terima kasih juga kami ucapkan kepada para peserta yang telah berpartisipasi aktif, dan juga teristimewa kami mengucapkan terima kasih kepada narasumber yang telah memberikan paparan yang luar biasa pada seminar hari ini. Baik Bapak dan Ibu, selanjutnya kita masuk kepada sesi akhir seminar kita yang akan disampaikan oleh Bu Dwi Wahyu Kurtianingsih.
Baik, terima kasih Mbak Tari. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sehat dan sejahtera untuk kita semua. Bapak Ibu, terima kasih sekali sudah menghadiri acara ini. Kita tiba pada akhir dari acara ini, yaitu Seminar Nasional Peluang Usaha bersama ADB. Ini adalah Seminar Nasional Peluang Usaha yang pertama pada tahun ini. Dan Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, hari ini dan kemarin kita telah bersama-sama mengikuti acara ini, dan juga terima kasih sekali kepada tentunya Bapak Ibu yang telah meluangkan waktu untuk melaksanakan atau berkunjung ke dalam acara ini. Bapak Ibu, kegiatan ini merupakan rangkaian seminar atas kerjasama LKPP dengan mitra pembangunan yang bertujuan untuk memberikan informasi mengenai peluang usaha, khususnya proyek-proyek pengadaan yang dilaksanakan pada mitra pembangunan. Dalam hal ini, hari ini adalah ADB. Jadi, Bapak Ibu hari ini mendapatkan informasi bagaimana cara mencari peluang, kemudian bagaimana mengikuti peluang tersebut, dan tentunya ada best practice tadi dari teman-teman Ceria Jasa, bagaimana memenangkan begitu ya. Itu hal yang sangat baik sekali experience-nya. Terima kasih. Bapak Ibu, sehingga Bapak Ibu pelaku usaha ini memiliki kesempatan luas untuk mengikuti pengadaan dan memanfaatkan peluang yang ada. Tidak hanya pengadaan barang jasa yang selama ini mungkin Bapak Ibu ketahui yang hanya dilakukan oleh kementerian, lembaga, pemerintah daerah dengan pendanaan APBN APBD, tetapi juga pengadaan barang jasa yang dilakukan di internasional organisasi seperti ADB, begitu Bapak Ibu. Kemudian tentunya pelaksanaan pengadaan ini dilakukan secara internasional dengan mengundang seluruh pelaku usaha di dunia ya, di internasional. Oleh sebab itu hal ini sangat bermanfaat bagi Bapak Ibu hari ini gitu ya, agar Bapak Ibu bisa memanfaatkan. Dan kami berharap tentunya informasi sharing session ini dapat mendorong dan meningkatkan kapasiti Bapak Ibu untuk mengikuti pengadaan tersebut. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, sebelum kami menutup kegiatan selama 2 hari ini, perkenankan kami menyampaikan terima kasih untuk tentunya Bapak Kepala LKPP dan Ibu Deputi Bidang Pengembangan Strategi dan Kebijakan di LKPP yang telah tentunya menyetujui kegiatan ini. Kemudian juga kami mengucapkan terima kasih dan apresiasi yang sangat tinggi kepada tentunya EDB dan juga para narasumber dari EDB, dan tentunya khusus untuk Ceria Jasa, kami juga mengucapkan terima kasih atas sharing knowledge-nya. Dan tentunya tak lupa kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada seluruh peserta yang berasal dari pelaku usaha nasional dan juga asosiasi pelaku usaha, dan ada beberapa dari kementerian dan lembaga yang menghadiri acara ini. Bapak Ibu, sampai bertemu minggu depan tanggal 10 Agustus kita punya acara seminar peluang usaha yang kedua bersama UNDP. Demikian Bapak Ibu, terima kasih atas perhatiannya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Ibu Dwi Wahyuni Kartianingsih, Director for Business Climate, Development and International Affairs. She is in charge in formulating strategies, policies, and guidelines regarding business climate and international cooperation in government procurement. Baik, Bapak dan Ibu hadirin yang kami hormati, demikian rangkaian acara bisnis atau seminar oleh LKPP bekerjasama dengan EDP. Jangan lupa Bapak Ibu untuk mengisi absen kehadiran maupun survei kegiatan serta melakukan pendaftaran untuk acara seminar peluang usaha bersama UNDP tanggal 10 Agustus 2022. Demikian, mohon maaf atas kesalahan dan kekurangan. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Santi 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 Om. Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Salam sehat, salam pengadaan. Terima kasih.
telepon ya.
Alhamdulillah satu selesai. Nanti kita
Kalau itu udah kelihatan di situ sih nggak apa.
Lagi PFS aja. Aduh, itu WA aku. Karena aku lagi show. Kan biasanya kalau full, aku buka yang lain bisa. Ternyata kalau online, kayak WA aku. Masih ini lagi. Hati-hati WA lu kebaca sedunia.
Itu bagus ya.
Deh, kamu lihat sama kota dia bilang ini apa bakalan sempurna di kenyataan semua berbeda, korupsi, kolusi dan nepotisme.
Makanya itu dosa ya dong.
Aku tuh udah lihat desain, tapi pas dia ngomong tuh bahaya nih bapak ini.
Sampai ngomong, kalau nggak tapi buka tuh. Makanya lebih baik. Soalnya
Filter.
iya Pak, kita pada praktek itu juga gimana itu?
Iya. Gitu ya.
Iya. Bapak sama sekali nggak ini. Proposal dia bilang tapi itu menggunakan proposal writer kan. Dia orang ketemu proposal.
Iya.